You are 14 years old. Tonight is your wedding night. Your family spent months preparing for this day, not in gold or silk, but in hope. Your new husband, Thomas, is barely 16. You've known him since childhood. He's kind. That was all you dared pray for. Then you hear it. Boots on stone. Torches crackling outside. Your father's hand freezes on the cup he's holding. Your mother's face drains of every last drop of color. Before anyone moves, before anyone speaks, you already know. The Lord has come to claim what the law says belongs to him first. Before we go any further, I have to say it genuinely amazes me that people from all over the world are curious about stories like this. If you're watching from somewhere far from medieval Europe, drop a comment. I'd love to know where this reached you. Her name was Alice. She lived in a village called Thornbury, tucked into the hills of northern England. The year was 1372. It was deep in the age when land meant everything, and lords owned it all. The fields, the rivers, the mills where grain was ground, the ovens where bread was baked. They owned the people too. Peasants like Alice were bound to the soil by law. They couldn't leave without permission. They couldn't marry without approval. And on the night they did marry, they weren't always the first to their own marriage bed. This wasn't whispered folklore. This was law. It had a name. In England and France, they called it various things. But the meaning was always the same: the Lord's right to the first night. In Latin legal texts, it appeared as just prime noctis. It meant that before a peasant husband could touch his bride, the lord of the manor could claim her first. Some lords took the bride to their chambers. Others allowed families to pay a fee, a ransom really, to buy their daughters back before the night began. Either way, the message was absolute. You do not own your life. We do. Historians have debated for decades whether this practice was widespread or rare, symbolic or literal. But here's what we know for certain. Redemption payments appear in manor records across England, France, Scotland, and parts of Germany. Families paid in coin, livestock, grain, anything they had to keep their daughters from being taken. You don't pay to escape something that doesn't exist. Church councils condemned the practice repeatedly throughout the 13th and 14th centuries. You don't condemn a myth. And folk songs passed down in villages for generations remembered it with bitterness that still cuts through the centuries. Alice had been betrothed to Thomas since they were children. Their families arranged it the way all peasant marriages were arranged. 2 small plots of land, 2 sets of hands for labor, 2 futures bound together for survival. The wedding was modest. There was bread, weak ale, a few songs sung by firelight. It was one of the only celebrations peasants were permitted. One fleeting moment of joy in lives defined by unrelenting work. Alice wore a simple linen dress her mother had embroidered over the course of a year. Thomas wore his father's tunic, cleaned and mended. They sat beside each other at a wooden table worn smooth by generations. They barely spoke. Both were too nervous, too young, too uncertain about what marriage even meant. Then the knock came. It wasn't gentle. It was the kind of knock that shatters peace. Thomas's father stood immediately. His face went rigid. He knew that sound. Every father in every village under feudal rule knew that sound. He walked to the door slowly, like a man approaching his own execution. When he opened it, the bailiff stood framed by torchlight. 3 armed men flanked him. Their faces showed nothing: no anger, no shame, no hesitation. This was routine. The bailiff's voice was flat, bureaucratic. Lord Edmund claims his right to the bride. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Alice didn't understand at first. She looked at Thomas, confused. His face had gone white. His hands, resting on the table, began to tremble. Thomas's father stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Perhaps we could offer payment instead. We have grain stored, 20 bushels, 30, we can." The bailiff shook his head. The right cannot be bought away tonight. It must be honored. Alias's mother collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Thomas stood so quickly his chair fell backward. He was 16, barely more than a boy pretending to be a man. He took one step toward the armed men before his father grabbed his arm. The grip was iron. The message was clear. Do not, they will kill you. They will kill all of us. Thomas's face twisted with something that looked like rage, but was really helplessness. His wedding night was being stolen, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing he could do. The bailiff gestured toward Alice. She stood on shaking legs. Her mother tried to embrace her, but couldn't stop weeping. No words came. What words exist for this? Alice walked toward the door. The armed men surrounded her immediately, not roughly, but firmly. She was property being collected. Nothing more. The walk through the village felt endless. Other families watched from darkened windows. Silent witnesses. Some had paid the fee to spare their daughters. Canas, like Alice's family, couldn't afford it. The manor house loomed ahead, torches blazing at its entrance. Lord Edmund was waiting. What happened in that room was not desire. It was law. The legal justification for this practice varied depending on who was defending it. Some lords framed it as ancient custom, stretching back to tribal traditions before kingdoms even existed. Others presented it as a duty of lordship. The lord protected his people, administered justice, provided land, and therefore held certain rights over them. A few even had the audacity to call it a favor. The lord, they said, would prepare the virgin bride for her husband, making the marriage easier for the young couple. The cruelty of that justification cannot be overstated. It was violence, dressed as kindness, domination disguised as duty. The practice spread across medieval Europe with chilling consistency. French manor records document it extensively. German territories recorded it in legal statutes. Scotland has clear evidence in estate account books. Parts of Italy and Spain practiced variations of it as well. The system wasn't uniform. Some lords demanded the actual first night with every bride. Others created a system of fees. Still others required symbolic submission. The bride would be brought to the lord's chamber, placed in his bed for a few minutes, then released. Even this symbolic version served its purpose. It reminded peasants that their bodies were not their own. And the fees prove it was real. In 1384, Scottish estate records list specific amounts, 20 shillings to exempt a bride from the lord's claim. French village accounts from the same period show payments in grain, livestock, and coin. One record from the village of Beaumarchais in France, dated 1327, explicitly mentions the lord's right in a legal statute governing marriages. These aren't folktales. These are accounting ledgers. Legal codes. The cold bureaucracy of institutionalized abuse. Not every lord enforced it the same way. Some took every bride they could. Others preferred the revenue stream from redemption payments. It was predictable income, like taxing grain or timber. Lords could estimate how many weddings would occur each year and calculate the profit. But even when lords accepted payment, the threat remained. The fear was the point. Every wedding became a reminder of absolute power. Every bride, whether taken or ransomed, learned the same lesson. Nothing is sacred. Not family. Not love. Not your own body. Dawn came slowly. Alice was sent back to Thomas's family home as the sun rose. She walked the same village path she had walked the night before. This time, no armed men accompanied her. She was no longer valuable enough to guard. The door stood open. Thomas's mother waited inside, her face hollow. She didn't ask what had happened. There was no need. Everyone already knew. Thomas sat at the table, staring at nothing. When Alice entered, he looked up briefly, then looked away. The shame was too great for either of them to bear. They were married now, technically, but the foundation was poisoned. Thomas would spend the rest of his life knowing what had been done to his wife. Alice would carry the memory in silence. 9 months later, Alice gave birth to a son. The timing left questions no one dared voice aloud. Was it Thomas's child or Lord Edmund's? The village wondered silently. Thomas raised the boy as his own. What else could he do? Rejection would only compound the shame. Lord Edmund's bastards were scattered across every village he controlled. These children had no legal rights to his estate. They couldn't inherit. They couldn't claim his name. But everyone knew who their fathers were. The resemblance was often unmistakable. Alice and Thomas were trapped. They couldn't leave the village. Serfs were bound to the land by law. Running away meant outlawry. Capture meant execution. They couldn't seek justice. Lord Edmund was the justice. He administered the courts, appointed the judges, enforced the laws. Appealing to him about his own actions was absurd. They couldn't even speak openly about what had happened. Complaining about a lord's legal rights was sedition. Sedition was punishable by death. The village priest knew what had happened. He offered quiet prayers and said nothing from the pulpit. The church officially opposed the practice. Multiple church councils declared it sinful, but local clergy depended on local lords for protection and resources. Speaking against Lord Edmund meant losing his patronage. Few priests were willing to risk that. Alice would eventually have daughters of her own. When those daughters reached marriageable age, she would have to prepare them. She would have to explain what might happen on their wedding nights. The cycle continued, generation after generation. Girls raised, knowing that marriage came with this shadow. Some families tried to resist. The consequences were always brutal. In 1389, a village in Catalonia barricaded a bride inside the church. Believing holy ground would protect her, the Lord's men broke down the doors. The priest who tried to intervene was beaten unconscious. The girl was taken anyway. Reprisals followed within days. The Lord ordered the village's grain stores burned. 3 men identified as ringleaders were hanged in the village square. Their bodies were left hanging for weeks. The families who had hidden the girl were stripped of their land. In Scotland, a father killed the bailiff who came to collect his daughter. He used a farming scythe, striking in desperation. The bailiff died quickly. The father didn't run. He stood over the body and waited. The Lord's men arrived within hours. They executed the father in front of his family. Then they executed his wife for not stopping him. Their children were made serfs of the lowest rank. All property was confiscated. The daughter was still taken to the Lord. But there were small acts of defiance that mattered in different ways. Some villages created collective funds specifically for redemption payments. Every family contributed a portion of their harvest. When a wedding approached, the village paid the Lord together. Southern French records document several villages maintaining these funds for decades. It drained resources, but it protected the girls. The system remained unchallenged, but the immediate horror was sometimes prevented. The practice didn't end suddenly. There was no dramatic abolition, no royal decree that changed everything overnight. It faded slowly across centuries. The Black Death, beginning in 1347, killed between a third and half of Europe's population. The labor shortage that followed gave surviving peasants new leverage. Dead peasants couldn't work the fields. Lords needed workers desperately. In some regions, peasants could negotiate better terms. A few villages successfully demanded the abolition of the lord's right as a condition of staying. But this only worked where peasants had mobility. In areas where serfdom remained absolute, the practice continued. By the 1400s, Western Europe saw gradual improvements. Growing literacy among peasants helped spread awareness of rights. Some regions negotiated collective charters with their lords. These charters often included abolishing the first-night claim. But the lords demanded payment for these freedoms. Villages had to buy their way out of abuse. Freedom was purchased, not granted. By the 1600s, it was largely gone from Western Europe. Not because lords suddenly developed consciences, but because the feudal system itself was collapsing. Market economies replaced manorial systems. Centralized monarchies reduced noble autonomy. Lords lost their absolute local power. As that power eroded, so did their ability to enforce customs like this. Later generations of nobles actively denied the practice had existed. Family records were edited or destroyed. Manor account books disappeared. By the 18th and 19th centuries, many aristocratic families claimed it was all myth, propaganda invented by their enemies. Historians had to reconstruct the truth from fragments: church condemnations, legal documents, payment records, folk songs. The evidence survived despite attempts to erase it. Alice lived for another 38 years. She died around 1410, approximately 52 years old. Parish records show she bore 5 children with Thomas. The first child, the boy whose paternity was questioned, grew up strong and helped work the fields. Thomas never spoke of it. Alice never spoke of it. But the silence carried weight. Her life continued in the pattern of all peasant women. She worked the fields during planting and harvest. She tended a small garden. She raised chickens, preserved food for winter, nursed children through illnesses. To outsiders, she appeared normal, a peasant wife fulfilling her duties. No one spoke of that wedding night. It became unmentionable history. Thomas died in 1407. He was 51. He had spent his entire adult life on the same plot of land where everything had happened. He saw Lord Edmund occasionally during harvest inspections. Each time, he had to bow respectfully, show deference to the man who had taken his wedding night. The humiliation never ended. It was woven into the structure of his existence. Alice outlived Thomas by 3 years. What she thought about during those final years, we cannot know. Did she remember that night constantly? Had she made peace with it? Did she feel relief that her daughters had mostly been spared through payments the family scraped together? Or did bitterness define her until the end? She left no written record. Peasant women didn't write memoirs. Their inner lives are inaccessible to history. Everything we know about Alice comes from external records. Church registers recording births and deaths, tax rolls listing her husband's name, manor accounts showing payments made. These documents prove she existed. They prove what happened to her. But they tell us nothing about how she felt. Her voice is lost. Only her circumstances remain documented. The universality of her story is what matters most. Alice was not unique. Every village under feudal rule had similar stories. Thousands of girls experienced what she experienced. Most are completely forgotten. No names survive. No records document their existence. They disappeared into history without leaving traces. Alice survives in these fragments only by accident. Her story represents countless others who left no evidence at all. This history makes people uncomfortable. That discomfort is precisely why it matters. Medieval Europe is often romanticized: knights in shining armor, codes of chivalry, noble quests. That romanticized version is fiction. The reality was darker. Brutality wasn't an aberration. It was encoded in law. The Lord's right wasn't the behavior of a few evil individuals. It was systemic. Legal structures supported it. Economic incentives sustained it. Social norms accepted it. The women who suffered under this system had no voice in the historical record. Men wrote the chronicles. Men composed the legal codes. Men kept the accounts. Women appear in those records only as property being transferred. Recovering their stories requires reading between lines, looking at payment records and church condemnations, piecing together fragments into coherent narratives. Return to that moment one final time. Alice walking through dark village streets in 1372, 14 years old, surrounded by armed men, heading toward the manor house. She knew what awaited her. She had no power to stop it, no one to appeal to, no law to protect her. The system was designed to strip her of every option except submission. This was marriage for medieval peasants. Joy and celebration existed, but always shadowed. Every wedding carried potential horror. Love between young couples had to navigate systems of power designed to break them. Thomas and Alice might have built something beautiful together. That possibility was stolen before they had a chance. The lords who claimed these rights were not ashamed. They recorded the practice in account books. They defended it in legal arguments. They saw it as legitimate exercise of authority. That is perhaps the most disturbing aspect. This wasn't secret abuse hidden from view. It was public, legal, and defended. The right of the Lord ended eventually. But it ended too late for thousands who lived under it. Every generation of medieval peasant girls knew this fear. Most endured it in silence. Their voices are lost now, but the evidence of what happened to them remains. And in remembering them, in refusing to look away, we deny the erasure that powerful men once tried to complete. Alice existed. She mattered. And what was done to her was not justice. It was never justice. It was only power, wielded without mercy, written into law, and called by a name that pretended it was something else.